You wanted the best. You've got the best podcast. The hottest podcast in the world. The Chris Voss Show, the preeminent podcast with guests so smart you may experience serious brain bleed. Get ready. Strap yourself in. Keep your hands, arms, and legs inside the vehicle at all times, because you're about to go on a monster education roller coaster with your brain. Now, here's your host, Chris Voss.
Hi, folks. Chris Voss here from the ChrisVossShow.com, the ChrisVossShow.com. Hey, we're coming here on a great podcast. We certainly appreciate you guys tuning in. And, oh my gosh, you're just going to be mind blown at the guests we have on today. But before we get to that, be sure to watch the video interview of this on YouTube.com/Chris Voss. Hit that bell notification so you get all the notifications that are on there. Be sure to follow me on Goodreads.com, and you can see our book club on there as well. I'm under Chris Voss. You can also see us on the newest syndication that we have. We've been welcomed onto Amazon Music. So you can see the show there. And, of course, you can see it in a million different syndications and everything else. So today, we have probably one of the most popular guests that we have ever booked. And that being, we've been doing a lot of pre-promotion. And the outpouring has been incredibly positive and incredibly interested. There's so many people that were, when does this get published, Chris? When does this get published, Chris? And so I'm excited to have him on. He is a patriot, and he is the author of the newest book that came out September 8th, Compromised, Counterintelligence and the Threat of Donald J. Trump. You may have heard of him. His name is Peter Strzok. Peter Strzok is the former FBI Deputy Assistant Director of Counterintelligence and 22-year veteran of the Bureau. He served as one of the original case agents for the Russian couple who inspired the TV series The Americans, and he was investigating a range of other high-profile cases that he's done. From WikiLeaks to the 9/11 hijackings to Hillary Clinton's private email server, he was selected to head the FBI's investigation into the Russian interference in the 2016 presidential campaign and worked with Robert Mueller as leader of the FBI's efforts in creating the Special Counsel's Office. Peter, welcome to the show.
Chris, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Tell us where people can find you on the interwebs and order up the book.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's on most online booksellers, obviously Amazon and Barnes & Noble. If you've got a local store, certainly a huge fan of independently owned local bookstores, so you can find it there as well. But hopefully it's a good read. I think you'll enjoy it, and encourage everybody to go get a copy.
I would encourage everybody to go get a copy, too. I just finished it last night. It is an extraordinary story. Not only it's your story, but it's a story of America. It's a story of the FBI. The details of it, if you're like someone who likes the minutia of details, how the FBI works, investigations, police work, all that sort of thing, spies, et cetera, it's a wonderful book to get into because you get into all the details and everything, and there's adventure and all that stuff. It's also heartbreaking in a way. My heart's still broken from last night, Peter. But we'll get into that. So let's talk about what motivated you to want to write this book.
So a couple of things. One, I was looking back on a career. I was fired from the FBI, and so trying to figure out what came next and what I was thinking about that time, and certainly seeing the things that were going on with Special Counsel Mueller and the things coming out of the administration. I wanted to tell a story. I mean, my career in counterintelligence, you kind of spin that out of the spotlight, trying to avoid being known whatsoever. But I kind of got involuntarily thrust into that light and figured, well, I want to tell the story, and I want people to have something that not only can they go to kind of get like the facts of what happened, but more than that, for somebody who's never worked counterintelligence, somebody who maybe, sees a spy movie, to actually bring them inside and explain what it's like to be a counterintelligence agent, what it's like to be an investigator, what it's like to go on a covert search or to go in and arrest somebody, and really bring that experience to the reader as sort of a backdrop to then explaining everything that happened in 2016 forward.
And that's what's a lot of fun about the book, because you go into detail and the complexity of everything that goes on. But this is also an American story. You begin your life with your parents in Iran. If you want to start as to how the book starts out.
Yeah, absolutely. So my father was a career Army officer, and then when he retired, he went into international development work. So we moved all around the world growing up, and certainly, one of the unique perspectives that I got from that. I mean, lived through the Iranian Revolution in 1978, 79, lived through a couple of revolutions in West Africa in the early 80s, and then again in Haiti in the mid 80s. And so throughout these, and they're all authoritarians, and you could see the kind of ways they would pervert power. And growing up, it was always something that you look back to America and always thought, God, how amazingly lucky we are, how powerful in the American experience and how remarkable our democracy. And so having that perspective, on the one hand is great, but then, I kind of talk about like seeing as 2016 and the current president and administration starts to encroach on that ideal in a way that seeing things now that I saw overseas in these authoritarian regimes, and finding that really concerning because I never imagined those things abroad, seeing them here. And it really goes to show, we take our democracy for granted a lot, and we can't. I mean, I think it's obviously apparent now we have to be out there every single day, owning the democracy, owning our rights and our liberties, and making sure we're doing everything we can to maintain it. Because it's not a birthright. We have to work for it. We got it from our forefathers, and we have to do our part to keep it going forward.
Benjamin Franklin, it's a republic as long as you can keep it.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And we're learning that.
Yes, I hope we don't end up in one of the situations where when you don't miss it until you don't have it anymore. But the interesting part about your story and Colonel Vindman, Fiona Hill, a lot of the people that were engaged in some of these things, what broke my heart was seeing these folks that came from other countries that have seen authoritarian and fascist regimes, that know what this is like, and they saw America as this shining city on the hill, this beacon of light, and they looked to America as this place of integrity, truth, honesty. Really, kind of, we've fallen a few times, but to see them have to end up testifying and abused and by people who and I've been guilty of this, who get very spoiled. I'm an American, nothing can stop America, and stuff. It's just heartbreaking to see that. What when you came to America, I think you went into the military. Give us a little bit about your history of growing up and your time in the military and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I came after high school and looking at college, got an ROTC scholarship to pay my way through school. So went through college, knew that when I got out of there, I'd go into the Army, and I did. Went on active duty at the 101st Airborne Division as an artillery officer. Loved it. Spent 4 years, and at the same time realized two things. Like, one, I really love public service. And two, the Army's great, but I think I want to do something that's got a little bit more of a, intellectual bent or a different, sort of kind of career path. And as it happened at the time, the Oklahoma City bombing had happened about a year earlier. Timothy McVeigh and some others blew up the Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City. And the FBI had gotten a bunch of money from Congress to hire counterterrorism analysts. And so I'm literally looking at the paper one day, saw an ad for, come work terrorism at the FBI. And I'm not one of these guys that, knew from the time I was 6 that I wanted to be an FBI agent. I was, sitting there and paper open saying, God, that looks amazing. And so, I applied. I was fortunate to get in, and best decision I ever made. I mean, I got in, realized that I wanted to be an agent, applied for that. I got in, about a year and a half later, and then went up to Boston in 1998 and spent, more than 20 years doing it, and the best job in the world. And I hope that comes through in the book. I mean, trying to sit there and the experience of going in every day. On the one hand, there's this altruistic, wonderful feeling of working to make America safer. But at the same time, it's really interesting work. I mean, it was like sitting in the most amazingly complex puzzle every single day, trying to figure things out. And it was great. And I think, and I hope that love comes through as you read it.
Yeah, it definitely would. What's the biggest misconception people have about you? I mean, people have seen you on TV. They've seen, everything that's gone on and all the garbage, that's gone on from tweets and evil people. What's the misconceptions that people have about you?
I think that I am very much like the average FBI person, and that is somebody who is drawn to their work, who absolutely, I mean, it sounds goofy and a little Boy Scoutish, but believes in the Constitution, believes in the oath of office. And, and I'm an average person in the sense that, like every other person I worked with over the course of those 20 years, you go into work just, dedicated to pursuing that work and doing it well. And so, all the stuff that's out there about the deep state or, people with a partisan agenda, it's all nonsense. And that's, some of it gets broken down into, well, there must be a us versus them partisan thing, but it's not that way at all. I mean, it isn't that way about me. And that's what frustrates me the most about being portrayed that way. But, when I talk about, contrast that to what I am is very consistent with what the FBI is. And that's hopefully what another thing people take some comfort in. There are a lot of really good men and women at the FBI who are doing their job day in and day out to protect America. And all this sideshow, this partisan back and forth, don't let that take away from the truth that there are a lot of people doing a really, really good job for America at the FBI.
And there's something extraordinary about Boy Scout values. I grew up as a Boy Scout. So, and I think a lot of people that work in our government, that work in the intelligence agency, like you say in the book, they leave their politics at the door. They have a belief system in doing what's right for this country, what's right for America. And I really appreciate that. And I think more Americans need to take and do that. So you rose to the rank of the organization. Throughout the story, you talk about, some of the different activities you did against a Russian couple, which is kind of extraordinary. If you want to expand a little bit about on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was a first office agent. That's what you call your first, when you're brand new out of Quantico. I was assigned up to Boston and got very fortunate to a pair of Russian intelligence officers called illegals. And they're called illegals because they're not here assigned to the embassy. They're not even, in their true identities, and they're not Russian. So in the case of these two, they had assumed the identities of some Canadian infants who had died close to birth. And that identity, as they were going up through training in the Soviet Union, because it really started that long before the Soviet Union fell, they kind of went through their training. They were selected, near the top of their class, and then paired with this false identity. And that they then went, they graduate, and they then spend years working their way around the world to kind of go from Canada and France, and ultimately they land in the United States, not as Russians, but as, Don Heathfield and, Tracy Ann Foley, who are, to all the world, a couple of Canadians and have two boys, and they're sitting there. And the goal is just to burrow into American society, to somehow go and get permanent residency and get their citizenship. And the whole time, they're just watching, and they're finding people who are moving and shaking and moving up the chain in government or industry. And they're sending all that information back to Moscow to go in a file. And maybe Moscow uses it in a month. Maybe they use it in 5 years. Maybe they use it in 10 years. But to sit there and watch them and all the things they were doing, like they would literally sit there and pull out a shortwave radio and, put it up, and they have a little Morse code broadcast, and they'd write down all the numbers, and then take this one-time pad and they'd subtract the numbers and then pull out the message there that had the secret communications from Moscow. So that stuff they were doing, the kind of thing you imagine or see in the movies of the Americans, they were doing it. And so to be able to watch that and watch them was, as a new agent, is extraordinary. I mean, it was the chance of a lifetime to work on a case like that.
And that was a lot of fun for me. I grew up in the age where Russia was bad. I don't know what happened in the last 5 years or something.
I don't either, because they still are.
Yeah, that's a good point. Duh. Yeah. But I mean, I grew up in the age where, I don't know about you, but I was cowering under my little wooden steel desk as a child, thinking that would save us from the nuclear bombs. We would do the nuclear bomb thing for when the Russians or Cuba dropped them on us. I grew up with the Russians being bad. And so the last 4 years, but the fun, exciting part about your story in these parts of the book, where you tell the story about bin Laden, or not bin Laden, but 9/11, and then these two Russian folks, it plays out like a movie. Like just seeing the extraordinary detail that has to go into it, the manpower, the money, it just blows my mind just how much work you guys have to put into this.
Yeah, it's true. And again, I'm glad to do that because a lot, I'm like everybody else. I'll sit there and I'll watch an hour-long show on TV or go to a 2-hour-long movie, and everything gets, compressed. Oh, we got the car, we put in the bug, and then, it's done. But it's never, that 30 seconds on the television screen takes weeks and a bunch of people to actually pull off. And what I was trying to do, a lot of books have been written by, obviously Director Comey wrote one and some others, but it's at a much higher level where they're having discussions at the White House or at a policy level. I wanted to take the reader inside, and there's this scene, one of the opening scenes, we're breaking into a bank in the middle of the night to get to the safety deposit box. And I was trying to say, we can talk about, briefing somebody at the White House or going to brief the Speaker of the House, but what's really cool, is you're sitting there in an alley behind a bank waiting for the cleaning crew to go in so you can get in there and break in and see what the illegals have. So I was trying to, again, bring the reader in so that if you ever wondered what it's like and what it's like for real, there's some TV shows that are pretty good, but this is really, as you said, and I'm glad it came across, it's really complicated, and it takes, there is no one person who does it. It's a huge team, and that's always, TVs likes to make, or movies, a hero or a person, but it's a team. I mean, every single thing, there's nothing I did in my career worthwhile that I did alone. There was always a huge number of people involved in it. So I'm glad that came through. And you saw
it really did. And it's fun. Like, I just read it like a movie. Like, I was just like, and then, there's anything can happen. You guys lay the best laid plans. And it's so like everyone's like, okay, what have we missed? Are we thinking of everything? You guys laid the best laid plans, and even I think in the story you guys are going to arrest them, and some local trooper gets in the way and blocks a whole armada of FBI cars and stuff. It's just crazy, some of the things that go on.
Yeah, and there's never, like anything in life, there's never anything that goes as you plan it, and particularly the more complicated the plan, inevitably something's going to go sideways. So it's just learning to kind of exist within that uncertainty of, okay, I know something's going to go sideways, so let's, figure out a way to get from here to there and, adapt to whatever comes along. So. And
it shows the hard work the FBI does too. One of the stories you tell in the book is about 9/11, and it also talks about how you're not searching for the limelight. You're a guy who's trying to stay under the radar. There's different reasons why you guys want to protect your guys' identity, secrecy. At one point, you guys find the hijackers' cars at the airport. Tell us a little bit about that, if you would.
Yeah, absolutely. So we were, after 9/11, 2 of the flights left from Boston. And so there was a tremendous amount of work that took place there trying to figure out, who the hijackers were. But once we started identifying them, they spent, in some cases, certainly the night before, but days before, in some cases, leading up to that. So what did they do? Were they in touch with anybody else? What things did they leave behind? But all this stuff. So we have agents, I'm just a probationary agent. Well, not quite. I'd just come off of probation at that time. But doing all those things, like going to the car rental agencies and the hotels and ATMs and getting CCTV, like everything you can imagine, trying to piece it down. And I was working at a group out at Logan Airport. And, one of the things we had done was, okay, get to all the car rental companies and see if we could figure out who and if anybody had rented a car, because they had to be getting around somehow. And it turned out they had. And so we were able to go and actually find that car at the airport. And of course, readers or your listeners may remember 9/11 if they're old enough, there were no flights, flights were shut down. So all the parking decks, everybody, when they drive and leave their car at the airport, well, nobody's come back to get it because you can't fly in the days after 9/11. Nobody's flying. So all the cars are still there. So we find theirs. And it's okay, here are all the cars around it, and trying to track down those people and interview them. But then, inevitably somebody leaked it to the TV station, and they show up. And because that was what I was doing on the counterintelligence side, just having to literally run around the corner and hide behind a pillar until, they got their shot and moved on, because it was, the nature of the work is that way. I mean, my goal was to retire that, in Moscow and Beijing, there's this big org chart of the organization chart of the FBI, and there's my block, and there's just a gray pixel, and there's some guys getting yelled at because they don't have a photograph of Pete. I mean, that was the intent at the end of my career, but it didn't end up that way. So that speaks to, though, the intent of what you wanted to do, where you want to stay anonymous, do your job, rock and roll, kick ass, use your Boy Scout values, and do a great job. As you get to the point in the story where you talk about, we start, the Papadopoulos stuff starts coming up and things of that nature. At what point, where are you in the structure of the FBI at that point? So at that point, I become the Deputy Assistant Director of the Counterintelligence Division. So that's the number 2 for all the counterintelligence work that the FBI does. So that's every Russian case, every China case, every espionage case, every counterproliferation case that, running that as one of the operational deputies. And so I was at headquarters, and I might have been, I'm trying to remember when I got promoted. So immediately before that, I was the section chief of what's called the counterespionage section. So every espionage case in the U.S., supervising that. that. And I was actually, that when that information from the friendly foreign government first came in, I was in that job as the chief of the counterespionage section. And of course, then, opened up the case was known then as Crossfire Hurricane, to try and figure out, who may have received this offer of assistance from the Russians on the Trump campaign. And then, we started that in very end of July. And then I was promoted early that fall into the deputy assistant director role.
Nice. And you're fairly close to Comey at that point, right?
Not as close as, close because for two reasons. One, the case on Secretary Clinton, which was called Mid-Year Exam, was something that he was very closely involved with. Obviously he made the speech on January 5th announcing that we had ended it, and then again reopening it in the fall. Both me and my partner, who was a senior analyst who led the Clinton email investigation, got very, briefed him a lot. And so we became, not close, but certainly we're doing a lot of interaction with him. And then when the Russian interference cases started, there was a kind of a continuation of that relationship. So, while I wasn't like his, one of his immediate deputies, certainly, there was enough interaction to, kind of gain appreciation of, him as a leader and kind of as he thought about the job as FBI director.
And with the Clinton emails, you get involved in that whole thing, and it's an extraordinary story in the book. If you want to expand a little on it.
Yeah, so I was fat, dumb, and happy sitting over at the Washington field office, which is kind of the local investigative office in the Washington, D.C. region. Like FBI headquarters doesn't do investigations. They supervise them. They do a bunch of, organizational management and guidance, but the day-to-day people out there investigating cases in Washington, D.C. sit at something called the Washington field office. And I was an assistant special agent in charge there. Happy as can be, great job, great people enjoying the work, and got a call to, hey, can you come over to headquarters and bring one of your supervisors? And I had heard rumblings that there was something going on with regard to former Secretary Clinton and thought it might be that, but then, walked in and they laid out the whole case, how it came to be, and that, their initial thought that they might be able to, open it and run it from headquarters and resolve it. It was going the other way. It was apparent that we were going to need to do a lot of work, and it was kind of, tag, you're it. And so, with my partner, his name is Derek in the book. That's not his real name, but, he and I said, all right, well, we've got this. Let's build out the team and figure out what we've got to do. And so then for the next 10-ish months, got a team together, found some space, burrowed deep in the middle of FBI headquarters, and went all over the world tracking down Secretary Clinton's damn emails and figuring out what happened with them.
This is one of the reasons people really need to grab this book. There's a lot of reasons, but this is one of the reasons you want to read this book. I was, when I was in 1986, I was, my audience knows this, but I adored Donald Trump. I was 20 years old or something, and I thought he was the greatest businessman in the world. And I followed him for several years. And by 1989, he'd fallen into his bankruptcies, and it became quite apparent at that point that he had some issues, let's put it that way. And I'd followed him throughout all of his life, just kind of keeping notes on him. I'd watch the bankruptcies keep rotating through the Atlantic Casino trust fund or investment vehicle they'd made. And then finally they kicked the family out. But it just became apparent over time. And then owning a lot of companies, I became very familiar with narcissist behavior. I had a couple friends who were just like Donald Trump. So, So to me, I knew what was going on. So I was screaming hair on fire all of 2015, 2016. And I've been screaming hair on fire ever since. But the Hillary Clinton story is like really, you get into it. And there's stuff that, I don't know if anybody's ever covered it, but it is really good, the whole Hillary Clinton section. And just seeing what beyond the scenes, her delaying of you guys, her kind of mucking about and pushing off the interviews until the last point. And then, there's the original laptops, there's the second laptops we'll get to, but that really was quite a story that you put in the book. And it really shows that, like, if she would have just, like, I was reading and I'm like, man, if you just would have sat down with the FBI early on, then you could have got that whole thing out of the way. Instead, it gave Trump fodder for all that time period. Yeah,
it did, and that was one of the frustrating things for us. I think we had, plenty to do, but certainly some of the things that, and again, was it her attorneys that were choosing to interact this way? I don't know, and she was busy on the campaign trail, but I don't want to excuse it either, because the fact is, at the end of the day, some of the delays, certainly, we had to do a complete investigation. We had to get every possible email from every potential source that we could. That's just good investigation. And there was no way that we're not going to do a complete investigation, because A, it's not the FBI, right? We do work well. But then B, this was under all kinds of scrutiny, from Republicans in Congress to Donald Trump to everybody else. So of course it's going to get picked apart. So naturally, we're going to have to be complete. And so why that didn't, we get to the point where, we identify 2 laptops that had been used to sort her emails. The stuff she said was work-related, the stuff she said was personal. There's a big chunk, like we never recovered some of the personal ones. I think we got all the work-related stuff, but these 2 laptops were clearly stuff investigatively that we had to do. And then we entered this extended fight back and forth with her attorneys to try and get it. And it was similar to some of the fights we had early on, that you're right. I think if we just sat down, if you just say, hey, look, it's an investigation. I've got nothing to hide. They're going to look at it. It's going to come out fine. And I'm happy to do whatever I can to help. Let's get it done quickly. We would have said, great, that's fine. Let's go as fast as we can and get it off everybody's plate. And what is hidden, because if you listen to some of the partisan discussion afterwards, it's like, oh, they were covering for Clinton. No, we were fighting. And if you go read the Inspector General did a report, it's like, hey, the FBI team and me in particular were really aggressively going after it. So that truth doesn't line up with the perception of some, Democratic operative that some want to paint about me. But the reality is, there were a lot of frustrating times. And, I do talk about that some and give examples of how, again, would it have been different had that unfolded more quickly or differently? Who knows? But, there are probably 100 things that could have caused the elections to have unfolded differently had they all happened.
And what I loved about it is that whole time I'm following politics. So I know the one half of the story. I'm seeing what Donald Trump is doing. I voted for Hillary. I grew up with Hillary in the 90s. Wasn't all that excited to have to vote for Hillary. I would have liked to have had another candidate, but I wasn't going to vote for that guy. And so I watched the whole thing unfold. And so the beautiful part about your book that I highly recommend people get it as one of the things is you tell the whole story that I'm missing in following Clinton and seeing, the fallout of Trump attacking her and using the emails, and, it becomes that lock her up chant. And as I'm reading your book, I'm listening to that other narrative in my head that I experienced and going, holy crap, man, she should have done this. And at least I think so, or attorneys or whatever, but you're seeing that play out in your book. And I'm listening to the other narrative in my head and I'm going, my God, maybe she did this, or maybe she, that's the whole fun of the book, right? This is figuring all that out. And then the Trump narrative and some of the warning signs start coming up for you guys in the FBI. And so those start becoming a parallel thing, correct?
Yeah, that's right. And, one of the other, frustrating is probably the wrong word, but while we're looking at Clinton, while we're fighting all these battles, while we're hearing, Trump say some things, I mean, we're hearing that, but that's not anything that's, generating an investigation. But what we didn't know, I mean, Russia's going crazy at this time, right? They've sent people into the U.S. They're going around. They're kind of surveying the landscape. They're finding socially divisive issues that they're going to turn around and go back and start planning in social media and Facebook and other places to try and pour gasoline on these conflict points. And then also they're sitting there working like mad to break into all the servers associated with the DNC and the DCCC, RNC too, but, they were particularly focused on the Democrats. They're starting to look at all of the various state voting infrastructure and databases. And so all this is going on, and we're seeing little things pop up. There's the group that works counterintelligence in the FBI is different from the group that works cyber matters. And now they talk to each other, and we embed people. The FBI embeds folks to try and bring those groups together. But we're seeing all these little things come up, but we have no idea in the spring and early summer of 2016 what the Russians are doing. And of course, they're doing an extraordinary amount. And we slowly start to see it. I mean, we get this lead at the end of July that opens the case, but we don't get a real good handle on what's going on in social media until, frankly, after the election. I mean, we saw Twitter people re-amplifying, but a lot of what the Russians were doing, literally, and I talk about it in the book, we're doing the very first interviews for the Crossfire Hurricane investigation, literally walking out of them overseas at the same moment Paul Manafort is walking in Manhattan to link up with a guy named Konstantin Klemnik to give him detailed polling data about everything the Trump campaign had. And we had no idea about that at the time. So what I always think and wonder is, all right, if we hadn't been so focused on resolving the Clinton server and email matter, had we managed to got that done in March and April, are we looking more carefully at Russia? Are we seeing this earlier than we did? Might that have made a difference? Who knows? But it's certainly, you're right. I mean, that's certainly something I think I and others, do reflect back on.
Yeah, most authors, when they do a book, you've got to have the plot and the subplot and different things to keep people active. You guys got one going on your own. And then, you talk in the book about how the FBI is not ready. No one's ready for this. I mean, no one had seen this sort of thing. I came up in social media as a rock star early on when Twitter was first launched and things of that nature, top 50 social media guy, Forbes, all that kind of crap, huge audience. And so back then we used to promote, hey, kumbaya, it's the new world and new age and everyone's going to be good. But somewhere around the end of this decade, we saw that whole thing turn where instead it became a tool for, the Arab Spring or things of that nature and democracy, evil organizations and governments went, hey, we can use this thing for evil. And so the FBI is stuck with this whole surprise that this whole attack that's going on to America, democracy, and everything else.
Yeah, that's right. And look, I mean, I failed. We failed. I mean, not only me, but the FBI, and not only the FBI, but the entirety of the U.S. government. It wasn't, we saw on the terrorism side, like Anwar al-Awlaki was using YouTube videos that were, radicalizing people inside, the U.S. and other countries without they weren't in contact with somebody associated with Al-Qaeda. They were watching these videos and self-radicalizing. And so we saw what the internet could do, how that could be used to move opinion. And certainly, people looking overseas saw what the Russians were doing on social media inside Russia and in places, nearby the Baltics or, the Ukraine or other folks, they're near abroad. But none of us, not me, not anybody else, sat there and said, well, hey, wait a minute. If they're doing it there, if it's really working well on the terrorism side, what might the Russians do within the U.S.? And so we were really caught flat-footed. I mean, by the time mid-16 came along, I mean, I remember going to a briefing, somebody in the private sector had been looking at Twitter reamplification networks, right? There was something, and it tended to be related to Russian sort of propaganda outlets. They'd tweet something, and then it would rapidly get reamplified and retweeted through a set network that was kind of established and was used several times. And I remember watching that going, holy cow. What does this mean? How bad can it be? How much do we not understand? Why are we just hearing about this now? And again, that's just Twitter. We weren't thinking about Facebook. We weren't thinking about, the stuff that came out later where they were actually paying for people to go organize protests in America and, holding up a sign saying happy birthday. I forget the guy's name, but it was their Russian boss, but doing that within domestic actors in the U.S. who had no idea they were dealing with Russians. And that sort of really active involvement in U.S. domestic activity on that scale is something none of us saw coming, and we should have, and again, that's a failure on my part. And the organization. But, I think we're catching up, but it's an unhappy place to be catching up on something like that.
I would say we failed as Americans because I think maybe what everyone underestimated was the American populace. I don't know. I guess I wouldn't say all of us, but the American populace has become so dumbed down and so lost in their own echo chambers with social media and the manipulation of it without algorithms of Facebook and Twitter. This is something we talk about fairly regularly. That they would fall for this. They would fall for the propaganda, that they wouldn't double check the facts.
Yeah, and that's really tough. And you're exactly right. I mean, people, I like Chris. I like what Chris has to say. I'm going to tune in and hear Chris because not only do I think he's great, but he's also reinforcing what I think and what I want to hear. And so that's going on. It's not, you don't have your choice of Dan Rather or Walter Cronkite, right? I mean, you've got any particular flavor you want now to go for what you believe. And so the problem becomes like people will tune in and listen to something because they believe it. But then if you go and try and say, oh, hey, what you're hearing actually is coming from Russia, well, that's almost like, you're rating on their personal beliefs, right? Well, no, this is what I believe. How dare you say this is Russian propaganda? Because I believe it and I think this is right. And so people's kind of, they feel insulted, they feel threatened by that. And so this kind of the self-selection of news sources, and then an inability, because if you challenge that belief system, it's like, I'm not challenging what you believe. I'm asking you to challenge some of the players that are giving you information. Believe whatever you want, but just take a little bit to understand, this might be some guy sitting in St. Petersburg somewhere who just wants America, at each other's neck. Separate that out. And if you can do that, well, fine, then go believe whatever you want and think whatever you want, but at least see that hidden hand, because within America, whatever we want, that's great. But don't let these foreign governments sit there pushing us one way or the other and pushing us against each other.
And Trump is clearly propagandizing and popularizing Russia and Putin during the campaign. He's like, yeah, we should all be friends and hang out together and have drinks and stuff. And you're like, what? Wait, what? I used to hide under the desk from these people. When did we cross this mark? So you guys start getting the data on propaganda or on Papadopoulos, and you guys start, seeing these different things, and you're like, what the heck's going on? And then you name the investigation after Rolling Stones. Are you a Rolling Stones fan?
Yeah, I am. And I was trying to remember, because everybody's asked, and for the longest time, code names like that for counterintelligence cases are classified. So I was writing the book and that hadn't come out. It might have been in the media, so I'm just not naming it at all. And then, it comes out in the IG report and some other stuff. But yeah, I was listening. And so of course people have asked, I think at the time I might've been listening to Hot Rocks, which, an assembly of kind of a lot of their singles. Yeah. But in any event, I had Jumpin' Jack Flash running through my mind, and there was always that. I love that the idea, those two words, being, I was born in a crossfire hurricane, but just crossfire hurricane, the idea and the imagery of that was like, God, this is, pretty amazing case name. I had no idea how
so I don't know if this is classified. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I don't know if this is classified. I don't know if you can tell me, but has the FBI ever looked into why the Rolling Stones are still alive? This seems like something that should be looked into.
I don't know that they have, but I can tell you my guess is that, look, I saw them just after the 4th of July last year. They came to not RFK Stadium. Yeah, but I mean, the FedEx Field, the successor to RFK Stadium. And God almighty, it was a great show. I mean, they got up there and, like any classic act, the music sounds like the music. It's not synth, it's not lip sync, but however old they are, 70s, 80s, and rocking out like they're 40 years, 50 years younger. I will let you and your listeners draw your own conclusions about how that is. I hope
everyone right now is
half as vigorous when I'm that age.
Everyone's like right now, so Peter Strzok is one of those guys who likes the Rolling Stones over the Beatles. So I see what kind of guy we're dealing with right here.
I will confess to that. I mean, nothing against the Beatles, but given the two, I'm definitely.
I think the Rolling Stones even say the Beatles are a good influence on him. So you start the thing, and right away, Papadopoulos. This was kind of interesting in this. I think I'd heard this in the news reports. But Papadopoulos interviews with you guys, and he goes home and erases his Facebook account he's had for 10 years. If that isn't a guilty sign, I don't know what is in my book.
Yeah, there was a lot of stuff he did that, look, I mean, he pled guilty to lying to us. He went to jail for lying to us. And again, it wasn't just lying. It was lying about his contact with the Russians. And there was a lot of kind of sketchy stuff he did, including, deleting the Facebook stuff. And, he's on his, coffee boy rehabilitation tour trying to say how he was, the mastermind behind, that got in the way of a lot of whatever it is he's claiming. But the fact of the matter is that he did have contact with people associated with the Russian government, more than one, that he actively hid. And so the question is, when you see that, why are you hiding that? And it's true of all these folks. I mean, there's nothing inherently wrong if Donald Trump or any other candidate says, I want to have a closer relationship with Russia or China or, whatever country. He ran on that, and that was clear. And we were very careful to make sure that we weren't ever doing anything investigatively that would get in the way of that, because that's not the FBI's role. That is perfectly legitimate activity. The problem is all the hidden stuff that was going on with Russia, the hidden stuff with Trump, the hidden stuff with Flynn, who became his national security advisor, the hidden stuff with his attorney general, Jeff Sessions, the hidden stuff with, both George Papadopoulos and, allegedly with Carter Page, who were both named foreign policy advisors, the hidden stuff with Paul Manafort, his campaign manager, and Rick Gates, his deputy campaign manager, the hidden stuff with Michael Cohen, his personal attorney. I mean, you just go down the entire hierarchy of his campaign, and all these folks have hidden relationships with Russia or people in Russia that make you wonder, this is, one, unprecedented, two, enormously concerning, and three, most of them end up getting charged and pleading guilty to violations of federal law, all about those hidden relationships with Russia. So, yeah, it was overwhelming at times to look at that sort of scope of what we were seeing as we started diving in.
And it was quite extraordinary to me to see some of the American public. There's always been that 30% that's kind of out there. They always supported Nixon no matter what he did. But to see these folks go against the FBI, go against the rule of law, start calling what the FBI is doing as maligned or a political sort of thing was crazy. I mean, Hoover would be rolling around his grave right now, wouldn't he?
Yeah, and I don't understand how that happened. I mean, I grew up, like my father grew up on a dairy farm in the middle of Wisconsin. My mother grew up on a tobacco farm right on the North Carolina, South Carolina line. And I remember growing up and we would go and they were both, we were Republicans, the family was Republicans. We would sit there on the 4th of July and go to church, thank God we're not the godless communists, and we'd eat apple pie and wave the flag and everything was good. And that was, it was clear and everybody agreed. And I don't know where, and now we got, like Ron Johnson from Wisconsin, the same, my father's, the entire family there, who's going to Moscow on the 4th of July and then coming back and taking all this Russian propaganda that he's using and, putting into stuff to try and, denigrate Joe Biden. I don't understand how things have flipped. And I don't understand at the end of the day, because, one thing that's absolutely still true, like, when I went into the Army, all the soldiers that I served with, they're from these, they're either from the, urban areas where they're trying to find a way out, or they're from the middle of America where they're trying to get off the farm or they're trying to see the world or whatever it is. That is that traditional 35% that you talk about. And so when you know that, and at the same time, you see Trump like not, the Russians putting bounties on the heads of Russian soldiers and on American soldiers in Afghanistan. When you see Russians like ramming American servicemen in Syria and injuring a bunch of people. I mean, these are the sons and daughters, the husbands and wives, the friends of that 35%. And our president is doing nothing. Nothing. I mean, it's the upside down. It's worse than nothing. I don't understand how that gap can exist, because it just doesn't make sense to me, because that guy that got injured in Syria, that gal who got injured in Syria, that person who was getting shot at in Afghanistan, that is the person from Wisconsin or Indiana or Pennsylvania or North Carolina. It's not some elitist from Chappaqua, so I just don't, I can't square the corners of that. I don't understand it.
It is quite the insanity of all of that. Well, the one thing I loved about the book, and this really needs to become a movie, hint, hint, anybody listening, option it, is I was watching you guys, you're going through the Clinton track, and you've got the new Trump track, and you guys, I felt for you guys. Before I read the book, I was feeling for you guys back in the day, because you guys have this guy who could be president, who oversees the intelligence agency, who would see the investigation if he's elected. And you guys are dealing with these extraordinary conflicting things that the FBI has never had to ask themselves in its whole experience of life, of like, what do we do with this?
Yeah, it was hard. Certainly it was difficult before the election, because, part of what you do is you never have enough resources to do what you want to do. So you look as an investigator and you say, okay, what's the range? What's the worst thing it can be? And what's kind of the best thing it can be? You don't ever just pick one thing and go to it. You're looking at the scope. Well, the worst thing was that he was a Manchurian candidate, right? That, he was wittingly working with Russia, taking, tasking, doing what they told him and responding to that. Now, all of us always felt that was unlikely, but just the fact that you had to say that, just the fact that that might be possible, is astounding. It's staggering to have to sit there and, we're all kind of shaking our head saying, none of us can believe we even have to say that, but yet we can't exclude that possibility. And then on the other side, which I think is frankly the truth, is that you don't have any central mastermind. You get a bunch of people who are largely incompetent. They're all grifters. They want to get rich, or they want to gain power, or they want to translate power into money, and they're all running around with their own agenda rather than protecting and serving America. They're trying to, serve themselves. And I think that's the reality of what happened. But so we're looking at all that, and the minutes and the hours and the days till the election just keep getting closer and closer and closer, and understanding, we're not coming to a resolution point. If anything, the horizon is just getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and we're finding all these things. And then the election comes, and everybody's expecting the chances are that Clinton's going to win, and then she doesn't. And it's like, all right, well, in 2 months, a month and a half, this guy's going to be the president of the United States. So then it's like, okay, well, we can't, this is now too significant. We can't just sit there and watch for 4 years and not know. So we've got to kind of pivot and figure out what can we do to responsibly try and wrap this up. But the pressure, it was unbelievable that summer. And then, it's like the movie you're watching and you think you defeat the boss at the end, and instead, he's just a little minion, and the real big boss is, and you got another 45 minutes left in the movie, and you're like, oh God, it was the same thing. It's like, all right, well, now he's been elected, and we still don't know truly how much, Trump himself is or isn't involved in this. And all these people under him and around him, we do know now. We know that they're, hiding and have these concealed relationships with Russia, and that pressure, that intensity just increased and increased and increased as time went on.
And then one of the other things I liked in the book, and one of the reasons people should read it, because like I said, it completes a lot of what we know and then what you know, and it comes together and you're like, wow, there's the whole picture. You talk about when the two laptops appear at the end game, you guys have wrapped the investigation, you think it's in the can, and then all of a sudden that comes up, and by duty and rules of the FBI and honor bound, you guys have to deal with this. And both you and Comey, you talk about in the book about dealing with, what do we do? Do we follow protocol? Do we follow the Justice Department's thing of not doing anything saying anything within 90 days of election, I think it is, or 60? And you guys are trying to decide, like, how is this all going to play out? Do we interfere with the election? Do we do our job? And how it all balances out. To me, I had, we were arguing like hell over this whole time, especially I remember the day that shit dropped about, okay, we're going to reopen the investigation for 2 laptops. I was like, Hillary's dead. I had friends that were saying, I wish I hadn't sent in my vote, because I would have flipped from Clinton to Trump. I had friends that were saying, I'm going to flip to Trump. So, and like you say in the book, you mentioned that a football game or any sort of game is lost by a whole lot of factors that go into it. I mean, I've been a Raiders fan to know there's a lot of ways you can lose. But I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that, but that was quite the experience to read about in the book.
Yeah, so those were really hard conversations at the end of October, and a lot of soul searching by everybody there. And, there's been, Comey's talked about it. A lot of folks have talked about the back and forth. Initially when he said, well, I think we need to notify Congress, I was against it. I didn't think that was the right call, because we didn't know what was on there. We didn't know if it would make a difference. And, I didn't articulate that very well. And then, one of the senior attorneys, sitting next to me chimed in and said, hey, look, are you worried that, if we do this, we might swing the election to Trump? And then Comey gives his now, recounted 1,000 times stories of, if we start taking political considerations into account in our decision-making, there lies the death of the FBI. But that was... And then I was persuaded, because his point was, look, I've already said we closed the case. I've already told Congress we've closed the case. If I don't then mention that now, if, to not speak is bad and actually is much worse than speaking and all the horrible things that will come from that. So, a couple of points. One, to the extent there was an original sin, if you will, that happened back with the July 5th timeframe, where he made that speech announcing the end of the investigation, because that puts us on this path that we can't get off of. And then that really forces a smaller set of decisions. And then the other thing is, like, I do think, and it's heartbreaking to feel this, that I do think that made a difference in the election. And, to your point about the football game, like, I do think, unfortunately, it might have played a role in getting Trump elected. I do think Russian influence also got him elected. But so did 1,000 other things. Should she have campaigned more in, Pennsylvania or Michigan or Wisconsin? And not, yes, but all of that is kind of baked into the American political process. I can tell you Russia doesn't belong in that process. And I can tell you, sadly, frankly, the FBI doesn't belong in that process. So I like the analogy of the football game, or any one play, but, of all those plays, there are a couple that didn't have any place in the game. And that's, with impossible, the benefit of hindsight. That's, one of those things I reflect on and think could have made a difference.
Yeah. I mean, there were tons of people who didn't vote. The vote was repressed. The social media factor of it. There was a lot of different things that went into it. Hillary Clinton could have gone to Wisconsin just once, for Christ's sake. Was that, anyway. You tell the story about how you guys are dealing with all that. Then Comey gets fired. And then you're dealing with that whole fallout and everything goes in. And then you go into, and that leads you into Mueller. If you want to expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, no. So to the earlier point about how things just seem to continue to accelerate and accelerate and accelerate. Of course, now we're post-inauguration. Trump is in power. He's having these meetings with Comey where he's asking him to, Flynn it's come out, didn't tell the truth about his interactions with the Russian ambassador. Trump fires him because he didn't tell the truth to Pence and others in the White House. And at the same time, he's telling Comey, hey, do me a favor, see if you can let this go. And so this pressure just continues, and then up to the point where suddenly, none of us expected, just out of the blue, that evening, whatever day of the week it was, Comey gets fired, and he's out in L.A. And we're all stunned because now it feels like, none of us know what's coming next. I mean, is it the kind of thing where somebody is going to come across from the Department of Justice or from the White House and say, close all your cases, give us all your evidence, give us all your files? I mean, we don't have any idea what is coming. All we know is that the head of the organization just had its head cut off. And all these things we were worried about, and there's this building concern about, do we need to open a case on the president himself? We had plenty of legal justification and authority to do it months earlier, and we just had held off for a lot of reasons. But then we're faced with this, and you have to assume the worst or prepare for the worst, just to be prudent, and just not knowing what's coming. And so we're sitting there scrambling, like, the memos Comey had written, like, the night he's fired, I'm sitting there at a multifunction scanner on our classified network, just getting those scanned into our file system so we can bury them and make sure they're part of the record and nobody can come and take it away until we try and figure out what is coming next. And of course, what comes next is, Trump sitting in the Oval Office with the Russian ambassador and the Russian foreign minister laughing it up, put his arm around him saying, he fired Comey, he was a real nut job. And so it's like the worst, all these, however bad you thought the nightmare was, you see this and it just keeps getting worse. And so, that was those 11, 12 days between the time Comey was fired and Mueller was appointed as the special counsel were, probably the 10, 11, 12 days of most stressful I've experienced in my life.
It was extraordinary for those of us who, I don't know, are patriots, I suppose, because it just went like this into overdrive. Because you're like, wait, we just fired Comey? And, I know enough about Nixon's Saturday Night Massacres and stuff to go, okay. And then you see the Russians in there. And, like, my head just went around on social media. I was like, what the hell? I think John Brennan said, I hope they swept the office after they left. And then we didn't get the pictures or any of the news from it. We got it from the Russians.
Yeah, that's right. Because he threw out, no American media was allowed in. Yep.
I was just like, what the hell? I'm moving to Cuba. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's an upgrade, but there you go. So you detail in the book, and this is where the book just goes like Star Wars when you go to hyperdrive, and it just starts punching. And you guys are just going through this. You're like our values and what do we do and how do we do this right? And it's a situation the FBI has never been in. And then McCabe, you go through the story of course, what was interesting to me in the book, because I've always been interested, and this is another reason people should grab the book, is the appointee or the gentleman who wrote the letter, and his name is escaping me right now for some reason, who wrote the letter that got Comey fired from the FBI.
Rod Rosenstein. Yep.
Rod Rosenstein's always been an interesting character to me to try and crack that nut. Like, I've spent the last 4 years trying to figure that nut out.
And I don't understand him. I mean,
I'm not calling him a nut.
He knew, right? I mean, it came out later in the Mueller report that he had gone up to the White House and Trump had asked him, Trump had written a letter firing Comey, which his attorney said, the White House attorney's like, no way in hell, you cannot send this. And so he asked Rosenstein to write it and told Rosenstein to put Russia in there. And Rosenstein said, no, I don't feel comfortable doing it. And then came back and wrote instead this letter criticizing Comey about his handling of the Clinton email investigation. And then, of course, the White House uses that as the fig leaf. We fired Comey because of this letter from the Deputy Attorney General. And Rosenstein claims to have been surprised. Like, I had no idea they're pitting it all on me. I'm not the one who did it. It was like, well, you're the acting Attorney General for a lot of this because Sessions had recused. How can you be so unaware that you, having had all this interaction, all this discussion at the White House with Trump himself, how can you not understand full well exactly what they were setting you up to do and that you willingly went in there? And so this professed surprise, I find, if it is true, then it is disappointing because I would hope that somebody who's the acting Attorney General and was the Deputy Attorney General would have enough political acumen to understand the ins and outs of the political environment in Washington, certainly under Trump, which we had been under for 4 months at that point. So I always thought that whoever writes the biography of him is going to be a biography worth reading. But now I've put the biography of Bill Barr on top of that, and in terms of can't figure it out, interesting reading. So in any event, there've been some interesting folks at the Department of Justice over the last few years.
Yeah, the original letter, we invited Andrew Weissman to come on for his new memoir, and he made a comment about the original letter that Trump had written. He called it tinfoil helmet material.
Yeah, it is. Having read it, it was. I think it was appropriate that his White House counsel kept him from sending it.
After reading all of his tweets, I think we can get a picture of what it goes into.
Several pages of that, right? So
what a tome of interesting. I hope someday we survive all this and we're able to look back on it and go, well, that was interesting. Otherwise, if this is what our future is, we're definitely screwed. And then you go through the whole thing where what was interesting, the story too, and this is a story that no one hears about. Another reason why people should grab the book is it tells a story. And my perception of it is, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but my perception is the FBI starts to throw you under the bus. Donald Trump starts winning. He starts putting them on the ropes. They start, instead of, I think Hoover would have done something different. But Hoover probably had tapes and stuff. Well, he usually did, actually. But it really seems like they start falling apart. He's attacking Andy McCabe. He's attacking you. He's attacking everybody. I mean, he just goes full out. And he's attacking Mueller. But it really I really started getting the impression reading the book, especially nearing the end, that the FBI really starts breaking down from his attack.
Yeah, I think there's some truth to that. I mean, I'm suing the FBI right now and DOJ.
Oh, right.
My firing was politically motivated and was done for improper reasons, directly as a result of the pressure from the president. So I believe that, and I think, but the thing is that it goes to I don't think anybody in the institution of the FBI or anybody else in the government was ready. Like, you have kind of the standard bureaucratic behavior that protects the organization that everybody knows and everybody has done for decades and decades and decades. Suddenly, when you're faced with a president who's personally attacking people and going after in very repeated, direct ways employees. I mean, at the time, I'm an FBI employee, so I can't talk to the media. I'm not allowed to say anything. And, there's all this these lies that are being thrown out there. I can't speak. And, the Bureau is, traditionally is, we're not going to speak at all. And, you see it not only in the FBI, but department after department after department, attacking people, you mentioned the State Department, Department of Defense, and all these organizations, people are taken aback, both personally, but also professionally. And some of it's like, well, I don't want to be in that line of fire. And then B, the organization that I'm running, I don't want in the line of fire. So the tendency is just to pull back and sorry, we got to cut you, we're throwing you loose, or casting you overboard, whatever analogy you want. But that has an insidious effect because it doesn't stop. And then so you've got all these people who are been, cut loose and demonized. And then which is horrible and awful. But then the other thing that does is anybody remaining in the organization, nobody's going to stick their neck out. And that's the goal. nobody is going to work cases against Trump. Nobody is going to speak out against something he's doing. I mean, that's the intent. And it's pretty effective, because I haven't seen a single U.S. government agency where there's been effective pushback and somebody's kept their job. And it's bad now, but that's why I'm terrified about another 4 years of it, because I think that's when the wheels come off. In a way that are hard, if not impossible, to fix in any reasonable way.
And me understanding narcissists, I don't know why I was so lucky. Maybe it's because I just own a lot of businesses and knew these people, but I understood that what he was doing was to cull the FBI and to put everybody into submission mode, to make it so that everyone would just fall in line and follow him. But one of the heartbreaking things about the book is, you go speak in front of Congress and you really take those boys on. You do a great job. The attacks are just blistering. It's heartbreaking to read throughout the thing, because like you say, you can't speak out. You're just stuck and just getting pummeled. I mean, like I say, I can't imagine. I've written a lot of ugly things to Donald Trump, and if you pull my messages, I'm going to be in the gulag in the next 4 years with you. if he gets reelected.
We'll have a lot of company, so it'll be.
Well, yeah, there'll be a lot of us in the gulag.
Scene for the shuffleboard.
We'll sing songs or something. But you go through that whole experience, but it's just heartbreaking to see you go through it. And everything else. You have your great moment in front of the Congress. You get to speak your thing. You're still holding and defending your FBI agency. You're the people you work for, the reputation that you have. Even now, you're still holding secrets that you'll probably take to your grave because those are classified, even though you're suing the FBI. I mean, like I say, I'm kind of a different sort of guy, which is probably why I'm not an FBI agent. I'd have a hard time not lashing back out. But the heartbreaking story for me came in the end when they just start just slowly moving you out of the agency. At one point you go through and you ask that for review, and there's different things. And usually there's a long procedure that goes into it. Fighting, getting pushed out of the FBI. But clearly, they're just trying to push you out. And then after the hearings, you start going through this thing where your family's attacked, where the press is showing up at your home, and death threats are coming to your family. You guys had to evacuate your house for a week. And it was just heartbreaking for me to read. I'm like, what the hell is this going on in America?
Yeah, and clearly it was hard. And writing about it was hard, hearing about it and talking about it is hard, but the heartbreaking thing is it wasn't just, I'm an example of what's happened to so many people, and, trying to sit there and say, hey, to personalize that and to try and put a human face on it that people can see, but also say, okay, but that is the same thing that Colonel Vindman's and Ambassador Yovanovitch and Dr. Hill and, the anonymous whistleblower who people track down and think they know who it is, but just person after person after person, anybody who is crossing, Dr. Fauci, I heard, is getting, all kinds of crazy threats, but anybody who has any variance of opinion is targeted in such a personal way that pervades into their private life and their family's private life. And I wanted to show that, at least in some way, that the cost and impact of that hopefully, people, because that goes on with a lot of, tacit agreement, whether it's from partisan media, whether it's partisans in Congress, but at some point, hopefully people will sit there and reassess and say, wait a minute, this is nothing we've ever done before or accepted before. And we've let this line go too far. So let's try and bring it back. And, my hope is certainly next administration we do, but at some point we've got to have a little bit of reckoning about, the boundaries that have been crossed that shouldn't have been crossed, and try and get those back to a reasonable spot.
I had the co-editor of Washington Post on the book Trump on Trial, and his wife, Mary Jordan. And one of the things I asked him, I played the scene from Colonel Vindman saying, because here right matters. And I asked him, does right still matter in America? And like you say, and you tell the story in your book, and like I said, it's heartbreaking to read. I didn't even know you could death threat an FBI agent. Like, I thought people came to your home if that happens, and maybe it does if they know where you are. But that just always seemed like a bad idea to me. I don't know, take it from me. But you go through that whole experience, and in the book, there's a point where you talk about one of your FBI agent friends, and he says sometimes, the good doesn't win. Sometimes the guys with all the money and the bad guys get away.
Yeah, and that was early on. Like this guy in senior agent in Boston. Again, I was 28, 29 years old, and he was a Vietnam vet. So he was, I think, past eligibility. Like you're eligible to retire at 50, mandatory at 57. So he was easily in his mid 50s. And, we're driving down Commonwealth Avenue, I think, in Boston, these beautiful brownstone homes, just like old money, right? Old money from before the American Revolution sort of money. And looking around and, and he saw me, I'm sure, looking around with my eyes wide open and just trying to point out to me that, we're going after all these people, but we tend to get the simple crime or the criminals you can't afford, a defense team of 50 attorneys. And so if you do get somebody who's amazingly wealthy, who wants to break the law, it's going to be really, really hard. But then his point was, of course, that's not the worst thing. The worst thing is that there are people that, if you want to pursue things that aren't, traditionally in our American value set, that you can influence the law, you can make things legal and, still abuse the system. And that's the real danger. And of course, as an FBI agent, you can't investigate that because it's not against the law. But this idea of, we are all participants in perfecting justice, and that never ends. And that goes to the broader idea of we have to be invested in democracy. This isn't some birthright. It isn't birthright that we have elections every 4 years and there's a peaceful transfer of power. We have to be engaged in all of this. And we've had, our grandfathers fighting the Nazis, and the Japanese knew that. But we've had this remarkable span of peace, notwithstanding the Vietnam and Korean Wars and the Cold War, but we've had this remarkable period of peace where people have kind of forgotten how active you really have to be to keep up the American experiment. And, like we kind of started out talking, I think we're realizing that again now, and it's going to get more and more apparent in the months ahead.
The crazy thing is we're going to find out what America really is and what America really wants to be. But on the other insane side, they may not get that choice because, just as of yesterday, Donald Trump he's giving fascist symbols that there may not be a transfer of power. He try and throw out ballots. One thing I did skip in our questions is you were the person who interviewed Michael Flynn, and you talk in the book about how you prepare for it, and actually the whole conversation with Michael Flynn, at least what you can tell us. And so that was quite an extraordinary thing to see in the book. But what do you feel now after being that guy who interviewed Michael Flynn, seeing what Bill Barr has done with that in reversing the charges or trying to?
Yeah, clearly, look, it's a miscarriage of justice, I think, more than think I know. This is a man who pled guilty not once, but twice to two different judges. He did it verbally. He did it in writing. He gave extensive statements to the special counsel where if you read the Mueller report, he is giving all kinds of explanations why he didn't tell the truth. I don't know what's going through his mind. I don't understand specifically to Flynn, and it was a plea bargain, right? Part of the word, a bargain, because, hey, we're making a bargain with you that you're going to plead guilty to this and these other things that he was investigated, which are now known, like his unregistered lobbying work for the government of Turkey and some other stuff that, what may be there from criminal exposure. The agreement, the bargain was that he would just plead guilty to this false statement. So I'm not sure what is going on in his mind, but I can tell you that, what I see the Attorney General doing when I see the lead prosecutor for that case quit because his conscience won't allow him to stay on that case because he's so disappointed and disturbed by what he's seeing. Those are huge alarm bells. And I'm beyond disappointed. There's certainly a level of disgust that this is a miscarriage of justice and it shouldn't be happening. And we'll see what the court does. I think, they'll have some hearings, and interesting to see what information comes out of that.
That was quite compelling in your book to be reading that, knowing, what's going on now. And you're just like, holy crap, this is the guy who asked the questions. And part of this whole thing is, you were, I think, a year and a half before your retirement with the FBI. McCabe, just the cruelty of the point of trying to take away as much of his pension as they possibly could. Vindman, Fiona Hill, the attacks, seeing them seeing Colonel Vindman taken out of the White House with his brother and the fallout that's gone on with that. One of the hardest things for me is this is supposed to be America. This is supposed to be right. There's supposed to be a good ending to this story. And that was one of the things I put to the Trump on Trial authors from the WAPO was when does right get to matter again? Because I'd really like to get to that point. And we're at this crisis position of voting and whether or not the votes are going to count, whether or not we're going to fall into a fascist regime where I think someone's going to seize and seize power and take over it. We may be looking at the new Trump family monarchy that we saw in the GOP convention, or we may have Biden. And somehow I just want that story to end good. Like there has to be that you. Like I'm like, where's the you, man?
Yeah, I think if we wait long enough, we'll get there. I talk about like one of the hard lessons of being an FBI agent is you find out that, you know somebody's done something wrong and you're never going to be able to prove it. And just that knowledge that bad people get away with doing bad things sometimes, and how hard a lesson that is to kind of absorb and live with. But I think, it's definitely, in my mind, a dark time and a lot of challenge ahead. But I think, if you look far enough out, I have every, I believe that 65, and I think it's more than 65%. I mean, I think some of that 35% really, there's a good 15, 20 there that, whatever it is, has haze, has gauze over their eyes, and that when the truth comes out, the truth, it'll be like sunlight from above, but things suddenly become clear. And I do have faith in, at the end of the day, we still do. Again, I go back to that analogy. I go back home to my parents' homes in the middle of Wisconsin, in the middle of the Carolinas. At the end of the day, we still believe in the same sort of things for America, and a lot of and a lot of things on top of that are contentious, but at the core, those things unite us. The things that unite us are stronger than the things that are dividing us apart, as bad and contentious as it is now, as in many demonstrations as we have now. But because, we got to, there's not, frankly, any other option, though. We got to fight through it and get to right.
All right, I'm going to put that on a soundbite loop, and every time I get discouraged, I'm just going to keep playing it over and over. That's what I do with right. America.
Yeah,
it's the right thing.
God,
I just keep.
And God, pray I'm right.
Yeah, let's say a little prayer right now. Like I say, every time I log into WAPO, the Washington Post, and see that democracy dies in darkness, I go, okay, we got one more day. We're getting there. We're still here. We're still rocking it. But yeah, I think it's going to be a dark time. I think it's going to be a dark time over the next few months. So one thing Joe Biden wanted me to ask you, he called me earlier, if he wins and he appoints James Comey as Attorney General, would you take the deputy position?
Well, let's get Biden elected first. I mean, right. Never say never, but I want to get to November 4th and then figure out what there's the good news and the bad news. The bad news is there's a ton that's broken. The good news is that means there's a lot of work to do to make things right again. So there's plenty of opportunity out there. So
would you go back to the FBI if the door was reopened for you? If there was a whole.
I think at this point, I'm now old enough to retire, so I think that whole calculus is changed. I mean, never say never. Clearly that I'm suing to be reinstated, but at this point, reinstatement and then retirement, I haven't thought about that. But it was the job of a lifetime. I mean, I'm so, to this day, despite all the horrible stuff that happened, I mean, the day in, day out, the men and women that were just amazing, and the job was amazing, and couldn't be more thankful for having had that opportunity.
Well, now you're an accomplished author. People love you. What's the future for Peter Strzok?
We'll see. I mean, I'm teaching at Georgetown, which is great, something I always wanted to do. And now, with the book out of the way, that was a very focused effort to get that done and edited and worked out and published. And so now it's kind of looking back out, and, public service has always been a strong draw, whether that's inside the government or outside the government. Again, there's a ton to do, for better or worse. And so I'm looking forward to, figuring out meaningful work and diving into that.
There you go. And I'm going to look forward to book 2, which is the good ending. The you part where and everything came out good, and the winners went into the sunset and the heroes. Sir, you're a hero and a patriot, and I just I love the book. I read it in 24 hours. Like, it was just gripping. It was like a movie. I encourage my whole audience to go out and grab this book, read it. And like I say, if you've been following the one track of all the news that we've been exposed to, Peter's book fills in the blank, and you get the full circle, and you're just like, holy moly, that went on. Check out his book, Compromise, Counterintelligence, and the Threat of Donald J. Trump. Thanks for being on the show with us today, Peter.
Chris, it was great to be here. Thank you very much.
And it was wonderful to have you. And to my audience, be sure to see the video version of this on youtube.com/Chris Voss. Hit that bell notification button. Order his book on Amazon. You can see all the great authors that have been on the Chris Voss Show at amazon.com/shop/Chris Voss. And also follow us on goodreads.com. You can see our book club group we just started over there. And also the CVPN online podcast. Thanks to my audience for tuning in. Be safe. Wear your mask. Register to vote, damn it. And vote like it's the last time you will, because it just very well might be. Thanks, Miles, for tuning in. We'll see you next time.